I was on the London Overground heading into Zone 1 late afternoon. Rain streaks dried into a dull, gray film on the windows. In the priority seats across from me sat a sunburned Midwestern dad in a fresh Yankees cap, clutching a wad of receipts like he was building a legal case. He squinted at the contactless symbol above the door and finally said, "If your trains took dollars like normal money, none of this card nonsense would be necessary." A British guy tried very politely to walk him through Oyster, contactless, currency, the whole ecosystem. Dad just shook his head. I figured the empire didn't fall. It just retired after dealing with guys like that for too long. In Paris, on a side street off Boulevard Saint-Germain, the smell of espresso and cigarette smoke braided together in the cold air. At the terrace table next to me, a freshly married Florida honeymooner in a matching just married hoodie laid out his phone, GoPro, and selfie stick like he was prepping a tactical breach. The waitress switched to English immediately and he grinned. "Can you just swipe my Visa and tip 20%, like in a real restaurant?" She explained service comprise, no need for tipping theatrics, how things work here. He nodded slowly like she'd revealed classified information. I sipped my coffee and realized the Eiffel Tower wasn't the most American landmark in Paris that day. In Rome, down by the Forum, the stones glowed that dusty orange they get right before sunset, and the air smelled like warm garbage and history layered together. A Texan guy in a golf shirt tucked into cargo shorts stood frowning at a 2,000-year-old arch as if it had personally failed a building inspection. He turned to his bored teenage son and declared, "Back home, this would be condemned and rebuilt with proper parking and an elevator." The guide tried explaining preservation, UNESCO, millennia, all that good stuff. He lasted 4 seconds before checking his watch. The real ruin wasn't the arch. It was his belief Rome needed a suburban developer. On a regional train into Munich, the carriage smelled faintly of pretzels and cheap beer, that special mix of odd-hour travel. Across the aisle, a young American guy in a college football hoodie scrolled his phone with his mouth slightly open, trying to decode the announcements. The conductor walked through calling out stations in German, and the guy leaned to his girlfriend and whispered, "Can't they just speak like regular European instead of these different versions?" An older German lady gently explained German, Austrian German, Swiss German, the whole family tree. He blinked, nodded, and returned to ESPN. At my age, you learn you can't update a man who refuses new software. In Barcelona, just off La Rambla, the sky was doing that pink-blue thing, and nobody was even thinking about dinner yet. A stocky sales manager from New Jersey in a logoed polo kept checking his watch like the tapas were late for a performance review. After the 5th glance, he announced to the table, "If this place wants American tourists, they need to start serving dinner at 6 like civilized countries." The waiter, impressively calm, walked him through Spanish mealtimes, tapas culture, late dinners. The guy smiled tightly and ordered fries. The only thing jet-lagged was his belief the world runs on Eastern Standard Time. On a small Greek island ferry, the air smelled like diesel and sunscreen, and the Aegean looked like it had been edited for saturation. A pale guy from Ohio in a visor had that deep lobster red you only earn by ignoring SPF 3 days straight. He dabbed at his shoulders, winced, and told his buddy, "The sun here must be broken. In Florida, I can do 6 hours easy." One of the crew, in pretty decent English, explained UV index, Mediterranean sun, ozone, why locals wear long sleeves. The tourists stared at his blistered shoulders like they'd betrayed him. Truth is, the only thing broken was his belief the planet orbits around Daytona Beach. In Amsterdam, on one of those canal streets where every crooked building looks like it's leaning into gossip, I watched a Midwestern family tour a rental canal house. The dad, built like a retired linebacker, stood at the base of a staircase that was basically a vertical suggestion. He stared up, hands on hips, and finally said, "In America, this would fail every safety code we've got. You people need real stairs." The Dutch host politely explained 17th century houses, plot taxes, tall and narrow architecture. The guy shook his head like gravity was a negotiable concept. Those stairs weren't dangerous, they just refused to accommodate his entitlement. On a Swiss intercity train sliding toward Zurich, everything inside looked cleaner than my first apartment ever got. Two American women in matching athleisure sat across from me, surrounded by shopping bags and water bottles plastered with inspirational stickers. One of them snapped her fingers at the ticket inspector and asked, "So where do we tip you for the service? Or is that already hidden in the outrageous ticket price?" He smiled and patiently explained salaries, no-tip culture, how the ticket covers transportation, not emotional labor. She frowned like he'd unplugged part of her worldview. Some people don't want fairness. They want familiar rules with different scenery. In Stockholm in late November, the sun gave up around 3, and the air had that permanent refrigerator chill. I watched a tall guy in a Dallas Cowboys jacket argue with the hotel receptionist about the darkness outside. He pointed at the windows like they were malfunctioning. "You guys really should fix your daylight hours. In the States, we get proper evenings." She calmly explained latitude, winter, the sun's behavior, even pulled up a little diagram. He stared at it, unimpressed. I just stood there thinking, the Earth's rotation apparently has a customer service department, and he wants the manager. In Dublin, tucked into the corner of a pub that smelled like old wood and spilled Guinness, I ended up next to a retired American cop doing the Roots tour. He was studying a framed photo of the building from the 1800s, horses and all. He pointed at it and asked the bartender, "So when did you guys, join the real modern world?" The bartender wiped a glass and calmly delivered a quick history lesson, independence, centuries, the usual. The old cop nodded slowly, absorbing it. Every so often, the loudest man in the room accidentally bumps into a timeline. On the walls of Dubrovnik, where the stones are polished by millions of steps and the sea looks painted on, a cruise ship dad in a neon wristband was sweating through his Caribbean Cruise 2019 t-shirt. Halfway up the staircase, he stopped, looked around the battlements, and declared, "In the US, there'd be escalators and air-conditioned walkways up here. They're missing out on accessibility revenue." The guide calmly explained UNESCO rules, preservation, the impossibility of bolting a shopping mall into a medieval fort. He nodded, unconvinced, and asked about a shuttle. Sometimes the only ruin on a heritage site is somebody's business plan. In Lisbon, on one of those yellow trams grinding up a hill so steep your knees start negotiating with you, the carriage was packed shoulder to shoulder. A young American influencer in crisp white sneakers held her phone on speaker, narrating everything for someone back home. As the driver rang the bell and people shushed her, she rolled her eyes and said, "Relax. If you had proper cars like us, nobody would be crammed into this toy." A local woman quietly explained public transport, narrow streets, the history of the trams. The girl shrugged and kept filming. Etiquette doesn't stand a chance once someone decides the world is their content farm. In Istanbul, on the European side near the Blue Mosque, the call to prayer drifted through the warm air. A middle-aged American businessman in a blazer and bright white sneakers stood at the entrance, wrestling with the idea of removing his shoes. He muttered to his colleague, "Back home, OSHA would shut this down. Barefoot in a public building is just wrong." An attendant in very patient English explained respect, ritual, cleanliness, why the rule exists. The man sighed like he was humoring an odd corporate memo. Sacred spaces don't break his rules, they just never agreed to them. On a Norwegian fjord cruise, the water was so calm, it looked fake. Mountains rising like someone copy-pasted them for symmetry. A young American guy in a fishing hat, clearly on his first big trip, stood at the railing with a beer and his compass app open. He turned to his buddy and said, "So if we keep going, we'll hit Europe soon, right?" A Norwegian nearby blinked, then gently explained they were already in Europe. This was Norway, not Narnia. The kid laughed it off and took another selfie. At some point, the map just throws its hands up and walks away. On the Gold Coast in Australia, mid-morning, the sun felt like it was 2 feet from your forehead, and the sand squeaked under every step. A dad from the Midwest had the full resort uniform, cargo shorts, baseball cap, brand new flip-flops, and a face turning pink by the second. Watching traffic crawl along the beachfront, he told his teenage son, "They should really switch to driving on the right like normal. This left side thing is just bad customer service." A lifeguard leaning on his board explained British influence, road rules, how Americans are the minority on that one. The waves kept rolling in, entirely unaffected by his preferred settings for the planet.